Hey Eric, how's it going?
Hello. Sorry about that.
I think we lost you at the very start of your presentation. Are you able to share your screen?
Yes.
All
Yeah,
right,
my
and
whole computer crashed.
I'm so sorry to hear that. So we are currently live. As
Okay.
you're setting up, I just wanted to ask, um, uh, when it comes to pitching, what questions do creators ask you the most often?
Well, I guess as we'll talk about today, the question I get most often is actually how to make a show Bible. That seems to be where a lot of people focus all their attention, whether it's how to make it or please review the one that I have. That is really like almost the biggest part of all my consultations is looking at anywhere from a 15 to a 30-page show Bible and trying to help people understand that that's just the tip of the iceberg. So as we'll talk about today, we can talk about those, we can get into those, but usually the problem occurs much long before you've made the show Bible is really where the real work is.
All right. Do you want to get into your presentation and then I can ask you questions afterwards?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right.
Okay, everyone. Hi, I'm Eric. Sorry about that technical error, but we'll dive right in. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about pitching your animated project. Here's what we're going to kind of go over. First of all, I'm going to tell you that really, when it talks about pitching an animated series, it's not just about the series, it's about intellectual property or IP. So before we can talk about pitching a series, I need to kind of explain to you where ideas come from and where they likely go when new ideas are created. So once those new ideas are kind of created and we talk about the paths they're in, I want to kind of remind you that all these different paths that an IP can go on really involves getting to know the sages who are experts in those areas can go to, knowing the kind of partners that will help you in the areas that it go to, and also trying to fit your idea in the decade, which actually means making sure that the IP that you have, the TV series idea you have, is generationally appropriate because fiction is a constantly moving target, and for something to be relevant, you kind of have to know where culture's at. So once we get through that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the format of cartoons. Think of myself as a little bit of a scientist myself in that area. So I'll talk about some of the formats that are important for your TV series pitch. And then, once you have kind of the idea of this whole thing, I'll talk about whether or not you want to take one journey, which is called the long solo, or another journey called bend the knees. We'll go through that. And then after we're done with that, I'll talk about how your animated series really is about a business and how that business has things like licensing, copyright, and trademark. So, all right, ready to go, Mike? Let's proceed. All right. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about me for you guys who don't know. So I've actually been in the business about 28 years. I've been an executive. I've been a showrunner. I've been a writer on different formats. I've been a producer and a company owner. I actually ran a production company for about a decade. I have my own YouTube channel called Surviving Animation, which is about 9,000 followers. For those of you who watched, I do apologize that I haven't put up video in about 7 months. I have a really good reason for that, which is I just gave birth to my first daughter, and I just moved from LA to Orlando. So all those things kind of put put YouTube on the back burner. But I'll be back. I'm settled in. My baby's healthy, so we'll be back to that soon. And I've also done a lot of public speaking, so a lot of events like this, whether they're live or virtual. I talk about the business of cartoons to a lot of people and companies. So here are some of the companies I've worked for. I worked for MTV when I first started in the 90s. I worked for an anime studio called Gonzo in Japan. I worked at Nerdcore in Canada. I worked at a bunch of other companies. My original company was called Wild Boar Media. And actually, the current company I'm at, Falcons Beyond, is based in Orlando, Florida. We are doing theme park animation, master planning, construction design, and also IP development and expansion. So we're actually doing an entire animated series that we're funding based on a theme park that we own, based on a franchise that we've homegrown, and I'm currently creative supervising through the park execution, through the animated series, through the card game, through the mobile activation, through the consumer products, and et cetera. So it's quite an exciting operation right now. So, okay, everything that I've just talked about kind of resulted in this. So here are some of the shows that I've worked at. Here's some of the properties that I've kind of birthed out there. You might recognize a few of them. One I didn't mention, there's looks like 6 guys there standing. I produced Linkin Park's Breaking the Habit music video, which won the 2004 MTV Video Music Award for Viewer's Choice. So, I've kind of done big projects and small. And, when I look back already, it's a pretty decent amount of work. So, what you did see is about 28 years of experience, 11 companies, 20 animated series, films, music videos, and comics. But what you didn't see is actually a lot of the misses. So, although that looks like a lot of good stuff, I probably produced about 70 animated pilots. I've been to at least 300 pitches where the buyer actually said no. I've easily read 2,000, 2,500 proposals. In my career, I kind of did like a rough back of the napkin count. Read about 5,000 at least pages of individual pitches. About 200 or more, maybe 300, I just haven't even read. I just get overloaded, or people send them to me unsolicited, so I can, out of my own legal safety, I instantly throw them away, instantly delete them. So, quick hot tip: do not send unsolicited proposals to anyone in the professional industry. Make sure you introduce yourself first. You ask them if it's okay to pitch something. In the traditional case, they'll send you what's called a submission release form. You both sign it, and then they can review your work. Just to make sure that both parties are legally safe before we start exchanging original concept ideas. And along the way, I've done about 100 contracts, whether they be partnerships, options, shopping agreements, co-productions, all kind of service provider work. So that's how the business works. There's a mountain of stuff in development and a little stuff up top. All right, so let's get into the meat of what I'm talking about. So you want to pitch an animated series. You think it's a great idea. You think the form it should take is serial episodic animation or individual animation. The first thing I tell people is, wait a minute, hold on. You're talking about an intellectual property. So let's talk a little about intellectual property. So when you think about it, you are creating an idea, right? And that idea, comes from your brain, and it starts to take a form, and that form is called, distribution, right? But depending on the form of it is, I always remind people that an idea and a story has a lot of other places it might naturally fit, so you might get excited, this is an animated series, but what you might be really talking about is a comic book. What you might really be talking about is, a game or a board game. There's a lot of people I've met who create these incredibly complex worlds. There are these lands and these nations and these different races and different things. And I look at it, I go, this is awesome. It's a game because, you really don't have a story here that we have enough real estate to tell. You have this body of stuff. Or I might say, hey, listen, this is a novel. This is like really something that takes 500 pages to really work out. So I kind of want to always remind people that what we're talking about is intellectual property. And just so you know, intellectual property isn't just that. It's also things like businesses and fine art and inventions and databases. Those are all other kinds of intellectual properties. But for the purpose of this, conversation, we'll talk about fictional worlds, original characters, and original stories. And that's kind of like really what the core heart of an original idea is that you currently think is going to be an animated series. Okay, so first of all, let's say you get past this tranche. You said, Eric, I have this idea, animated series. I look at it, I say, you know what, you're right. Actually, it seems like it could be in this direction, but I go, oh, actually, you know what? It's over here. So what I do is I tell people to really look at their property and try to think about what is the best kind of sage do you think would guide the direction of where your thing wants to go, right? And I think that kind of helps me guide. And when I think about it in my head, for example, you think about the guy who designed I forget his name, Kojima, right? He's the game designer, right? Sometimes I have an idea in my head and I'm working, I go, you know what? I feel like I want to play this, what would Kojima do? How would he treat this? What kind of things? And if it naturally is going there, maybe you've got a game, or if it's like, hey, you know what? I really think that this superhero that I created has all this story, all this depth. I think you have this endless fight. And oh, you know what? Maybe the best place for that is a comic. So really think about the sages who would guide you in that direction, or whether it's film or whatever. So I always tell people who come to me like, who would be the ultimate person you would want to work with you on this, right? If it turns out that person is in that different industry, then maybe your thing is not for animation. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now that you've kind of, let's say you've gotten past the first step and the second step, and you're like, yep, it's definitely still an animated series. I still want to do it. I always try to say, or I always want to try to inspire people to say, what makes this relevant today? What makes this the story that we feel is important, right? So from some findings I think that are important, at least about 2022, where we're at today, and this leans a little bit more towards serial episodic action adventure, but it also is true for comedy. It also is true for preschool. It's also true for the other forms. Is that where we're at right now? Some of you may have heard or studied this, famous historian, this mythological teacher named Joseph Campbell, and he talked a lot about the heroic journey, right? So the heroic journey is this kind of classic Star Wars idea where there's like a hero, and then he like has a calling, and then he refuses the call, and then he meets mentors and friends, and he goes on this adventure, and he finds this mystical knowledge and body of the whale, all this stuff, comes back, and then he goes back to his hometown. And he's like, I have something to teach everybody, right? That's the classic heroic journey, right? Now, where we're at now is we're all connected all the time, right? And in that interconnected world, we're not always looking for the single hero, right? We're looking for the collective journey. The collective journey is something really important to keep in mind because it resonates with people, right? I mean, what's interesting about 2022 is that if someone has an idea that something that's important, 1,000 people also have the same idea at the same time, right? And which probably means a million, which probably means 20 million, right? So the idea that we're all kind of in this together and we're all talking to each other simultaneously makes it very hard for a single hero to have relevance because it's very rare that a single person knows something. We all kind of know everything at the same time. So just be aware that collective journeys, and I could say, whether it's Game of Thrones, which is the easiest one to talk about, where really there's kind of no main character. I mean, of course, you kind of have your Jon Snow, and you have your Tywin Lannister, and you have your Cersei Lannister, and etc. And they're main-ish, but everyone's kind of circling around each other, right? And what you find out in the end of that series, without spoilers, although you've probably seen it, probably disappointed, like the rest of us, is that really it's just the systematic problem is the problem. And we have to all stop kind of going on the wheel of destruction, aid, hanger, and greed. Did I say hanger? I meant anger. Anger and greed. And once we leave that and we stop competing against each other, it's not about being the king or sitting on the throne. It's about destroying the throne, right? So that's the classic collective journey, right? So second to be aware of, at least in 2022, is what I call metatextual awareness. And that is that, consumers are smarter, they're absorbing media at a faster pace, and even like the youngest audiences are really aware of story tropes. They're really aware that if you're going to kind of present a character this way, there are some expected things that character is going to do. So you got to kind of be on the inside of that. And so one of the big problems, for example, I discover when I read a lot of show Bibles, look at a lot of people's proposals, is kind of the obviousness of the cards they're playing, right? So, here's a typical show I might get, meet a young boy, he's got some kind of magical weapon, there's a bad guy, and then the world is going to be in trouble unless this good guy beats the bad guy, right? Like we all see that coming like a mile away, and so do audiences. So you have to be aware that the metatextual fiber is very interconnected and thick right now. So it's kind of harder and harder to surprise people, right? On the other side, sometimes I read a proposal which is like, here is every single ethnicity, and here's every single kind of current issue, and here's every single, religious type and preference and physical handicap. And, kind of this full rainbow of characters. And every one of them is going to kind of prove that, we have this grand equality. And, that's wonderful. It's really great, but it's also super obvious. And I think in the metatextual awareness world, you have to be careful not to play those cards too heavily, because once the message and the morality starts to sit above the entertainment value, it's instantly not entertainment. People just run away from that. So, again, metatextual awareness. So that kind of bleeds into where, a little bit about cultural authenticity. So of course, like fully whitewashing is kind of long gone. It's been gone for many years. It's very hard to do those kind of shows. Kind of like the days of the Friends cast. It's like very tough to do right now, right? At the same time, Captain Planet's out. No one wants to see like everyone sitting in this perfect rainbow of everyone getting along together and just kind of like putting a token character in to make sure that you covered all your bases, right? So the right story and the right cast is what I feel is good right now. So you can have a show like Vikings, and every character can be Caucasian because it's historically accurate. It's appropriate for that tale, right? And you can have Squid Game, which every character is Korean because it's a story about Korea. So it's natural that the majority of those characters are Korean because that's where it's based. And also, you can have a character like America Chavez, who's Latin America and LGBTQ. That's fantastic, as long as you're not covering the whole thing with like, hey guys, here's the message, here's the message. Just make sure it's authentic to the story you want to tell and authentic to the culture you're expressing. So, all right, so that gives kind of a general idea of why or how your property can kind of sit in the right time period. Is something to think about, even if you're doing fantasy, even if you're doing something in space, you still have to be culturally relevant to the current audience who's watching it right now in 2022. Okay, all right. So ready to move on to the next thing. And this is actually the biggest problem I see in Bibles, show Bibles and presentations and pitches, outside of all the stuff I've talked about before, is just straight up format, right? So let's talk a little about format. So if you think about classic television, if you think about everything that you watch outside of movies or streaming movies, it's police, hospital, legal, occupational, family, and flyer, right? Those are the categories of television storytelling, right? You're probably thinking to yourself, like, wait a minute, there's got to be more, right? But I really challenge you to find me one that is not one of these. And the only one that I have to explain, which is where a lot of people throw, oh, mine is this thing, is called a flyer. So a flyer is by definition a story idea that you have to teach an audience a certain amount of information before your show takes off and they get it, right? So if you look at police, hospital, legal, occupational, which is anyone's job, which by the way includes all superheroes, you just get it right away. Like, you could turn the television on and you see a person in a courtroom hammering a gavel and you're like, yep, it's a legal show. Or you see, police car running down chasing bad guys. That's a bad guy show. Or a person shows up to their job, or you see like, the classic family living room and like mom and dad are sitting there and the son walks in and goes, I'm home. And you're like, great, family show, right? Everything else is flyer. So like, for example, Breaking Bad, right? You've got to teach the audience that he was a teacher. You've got to teach the audience that his wife has an illness. You have to teach an audience that he receives a moment of like, uh-oh, he has an opportunity to earn money to help his wife. And guess what? He has to sell meth. He has to make meth. And he's a school teacher. Okay, now we're in flight. And you're like riveted. But you've got to teach audiences that, right? And so flyers are typically the hardest ones to sell because people have to invest the energy to get into it, right? So anyway, once you have that format, right? Here's what audiences need to understand or need to know before they can decide whether or not they want to watch your show. And this is really from television, but it's also for animation, and it's kind of like media in general. So you want to take them to a new where and when. And one way to say it is take me to a place I haven't been before or haven't been in a long time. Next, you have to paint basically a main character and their thing, that makes them memorable or their point of view. Then once you set up the format, time and place, main character, you then have to kind of surround that character with 7 to 10 minor majors who oppose or support that character's thing, right? So when you're done with all of that, you've got to prove to the audience and to your buyer that you are uniquely qualified to tell this specific story. Okay? So that sounds like a lot of academics. So let me just kind of do like a rough, I'll just come up with it right now, basic idea to kind of show you what kind of classic development is like. So let's say I want to do an occupational. So that's someone's job. I'm going to pick a fire department from the 1800s in San Francisco, right? So, okay, hey, that's interesting. I've never seen a fire department in San Francisco in the 1800s. That's interesting. Is that like kind of when, you know, the Wild West, there's still some Native Americans, there's still some, kind of shoot 'em ups, there's gold rushes. Okay, this is kind of a vibrant time period. So I'm going to start with a 18-year-old daughter who is half Native and half Caucasian, right? And let's say her dad was the fireman, but now he's retired. And the mom is a Native American who really wants to go back to her roots of Native American culture, right? Okay, so now I have my main and what's their thing? Do I take the fireman business or do I go back to my roots? So now I know their thing, right? So now I got to think, and it's pretty organic. What kind of characters would oppose and support that, right? Love interest who said definitely go into the fireman industry. Uncle who says don't do that. You should go back to the classic ways. Sister who says I don't care what you do, just be yourself. Don't do what other people tell you. Other firemen who work were like never going to accept her, right? Another character, it just goes on and on and on. But you see how every character is kind of related to your mission statement, related to your time and place, related to your theme, related to your character's thing. So that's actually great. Hey, I have all that. Now, the only way I would actually sell this is if I were to tell some network, I come from 2 generations of firemen. I've seen it all. Like, I definitely know what it's like to be sitting there on a Saturday for 8 hours and have nothing to do. I also know what it's like to do, have 3 fires happen in one day. I also know what it's like to, lose an uncle to fire. And I also know, so all that authenticity is then informing that my format, my main character, my time and place is going to work. And that's where the buy happens. Okay. All right. So now you know all this classical structure. You might be saying to yourself, wait a minute, we're just making cartoons here. We're like not doing all this television, but it still holds true no matter the format, right? And so let's go through some of the formats. You can see that it actually still matters. So here are some sample formats that you might rush into, or some sample audiences or categories that you might rush into when you're trying to figure out your show. So preschool 2 to 5 divided by educational on one side, which requires an educator's written confirmation, like an actual certified educator to say that this is actually proper STEM or proper STEAM. And then you have social emotional learning, a show like Bluey, where it's like, hey, we're just talking about feelings, we're talking about getting along. But even in that, Bluey is a family show. Bluey is actually just a regular kid. So what do we surround them with? A dad, a mom, a younger brother, friends. But the entire structure still works. And where are we? We're in kind of, I guess, modern, is it Australia or New Zealand? I can't remember. And it is modern day. But they're all dogs. So, hey, there's a time and place we haven't been before. There's an authentic character. There's a family structure. And, the creators of Bluey have this unique comedic approach that's also beautiful and holistic and emotionally relevant. So it still follows the classic format. Okay. As we go, bridge 4 to 7 educational, 4 to 7 social emotional, 4 to 7 soft comedy, 4 to 7 action collectible focused, 4 to 7 social collectible focus, and then there's even more. 6 to 11 comedy for kids, 6 to 11 comedy for boys action adventure 6 to 11, girls 6 to 11. So, I mean, you can see all these subcategories are extremely important when you're pitching your animated show. And I think, one of the ways to definitely not get a pitch sold is to walk into a place and say, I kind of think this is for kids. Because kids is a very divided category in animation. It's very set with rules in those different areas. And the real buyers are usually buying with a certain slice. So if you go into like let's say going to Nick Jr., and Nick Jr. actually is really exists more on apps now than a channel. It's actually much more of a oh, I'm sorry, that's Noggin. My apologies. Nick Jr., if you say, hey, I think this is great for kids, they're going to go, we service preschool and bridge. We have our social emotional department, we have our educational thing, but we're not so much into hardcore education. That's PBS Kids. You're talking about 4 to 7 social emotional here, or 2 to 5 social emotional. Hey, now you're in the Nick show. But if you're like, I meant 9 to 14 kids, you're just in the wrong spot. So I hope that kind of makes sense. All right, so all that format aside, all that discussion about cultural relevance side, all that put aside of like, we definitely want this to be an animated series, right? Now, where do you go from here? Before I say pitch, I offer people 2 paths, right? So on the one side is the long solo. And I think that's especially where we've been the past 3 or 4 years, right? Which is you can go at it alone. There's a lot of franchises, a lot of properties. Really start on platforms like YouTube, like Webtoons, self-published novels, or the classic 3 F's of financing, if you haven't heard of those before, which is friends, family, and fools. So if you can find a way to raise a bit of money somehow, you can just make it. There's no one stopping you, except for it takes a long, long time. You're probably going to not make any money. You're just going to spend a lot of money. But hey, you have freedom, so you can make the show whatever you want. You can make it in any direction you want. And you'd be surprised. I mean, Cocomelon comes from the YouTube platform. Think about how successful that is on all measures. Consistently the #1 to #5 show on Netflix, period. Biggest YouTube channel of all time. But, I would say it took the long solo approach, right? On the other side is, bending the knee, which is now I'm in the pitching world. Now I'm working with a large distributor, a streaming company, or even a publisher who might want to pay for the comic and take all rights in exchange except for royalties on the comic sales and adaptation sales, or a game company. So they'll finance it, they'll distribute it, they'll own most everything, but you get paid to make it. You'll get a really nice paycheck for a couple of years. And they might give you like a teensy little net on the back end, but as your career advances, you'll make more and more. But generally, they're going to control everything. So that's not a terrible thing, especially if you're, medium in the industry, or you don't really have all those connections. You want to, get better at making shows, and yeah, it might be a great thing. So again, long solo and bending. Okay, great. So now you know all this. You know how to create your property. You know that animation is the best first version. You just checked all the boxes. You really feel it's culturally relevant. You're trying to decide whether or not you want to take this long solo journey or bend the knee to a distributor. Well, I've got some bad, dirty news for you, is you have to remember that making animation is a business, right? And of course, I love artists with visions for original ideas. I love writers who just want to tell stories for story's sake. I have to remind them all the time that animation is a cost. Animation is a really expensive thing to bring intellectual property out. So if intellectual property is going to be put into the marketplace, how's it going to make money back, right? So whoever's going to finance it is going to want a couple of triggers. There is the idea that, some shows will live on boosting the subscriber base of its streamer platform. Those are pretty rare, and those are actually really saved for the top level unique artists and people really experienced in the industry. And those days, I fear, are in trouble. Fantastic series like, Centaur World or Maya and the Three, or even I can't think of it, but it's the one where it was a live podcast that was actually Midnight Gospel. Man, I love those shows. They're so good. They're so original. They're so unique. They're so filled with voice. Intuitively, as a producer, I don't see a lot of other businesses spawn from them. So remember, when you're developing your animated series, you're creating an intellectual property, and if you're building it to eventually make either yourself or a lot of people money, you have to get in the conversation of licensing, which is, will my intellectual property sell consumer products? Will it do toys, apparel, posters, stationery, video game adaptations, Roblox activations, mobile games, NFTs, all that kind of stuff? Will it also work well in adaptation? Can you make a theme park? Can you make films? Can you make TV series and novelizations? Or is it really great in that it can be expanded? It can go into sequels and spin-offs. You can have graphic novels. I think all of that is the licensing side, and there are a lot of people who will view animation only with this lens, and that's harsh. But there are all people who think this is all like, hey, I don't want to be bothered with that. I'm a pure storyteller. As a producer, as a development executive, I'm forced to kind of hold both, and I would tell you out there who are watching, who are trying to create new works, the longevity of your property, your personal wealth in the long run, the chances of your property being picked up by someone are in many ways also related to the licensing potential of what you do. So have a long talk about that, and try to talk to some people who make toys, and talk to people who make games, and talk to people who sell merchandise, and you'll get all this intuition from them. And when you go and create, just keep this in mind. All right. Okay. Last little subject. Especially when it comes to pitching, proposing. I do, like I said, I never look an unsolicited pitch. I always have a submission release form, but some people do ask me, how do I copyright? What's trademark? And so just a single slide in that, which is really remember that copyright is triggered upon the creation of an original idea into a fixed format, right? So if I say, hey, I have an idea about a robot who comes from the future to the past to like help save the universe, that I can do that, even though it sounds like Terminator, I can do that, once I fix it then into an actual form. If I write page 1, exterior day, 2022, thunder hits, and a giant robot drops onto the ground. That's still okay, right? It's still okay. When it gets bad is when I say he drops in with one knee to the ground, the sphere of electricity goes around him, that sphere disappears, and a large naked man stands up who is muscular. That fixed format someone could challenge is copying Terminator, right? But everything before that is still just an idea and still actually okay. But I don't own it or I don't have copyright until I actually commit to that actual fixed format, okay? But you probably heard people say, oh, you should send it in a letter to yourself, or you should, send it to the copyright office. Sure, go ahead. Sending it to the copyright office will assist you in some legal protection as it goes forward. It doesn't really do much after that, but hey, if you want to do it, let's go for it. Once you do that, current copyright is that since 1978, is that copyright lasts for the life of the author plus 70 years. So that's how long you can have something owned. If you guys know, recently actually Winnie the Pooh went into public domain. So believe it or not, there's even a crazy, creepy horror film that's out right now based on Winnie the Pooh, because no one can officially ever own Winnie the Pooh ever again. Okay. All right. So trademark, it's a term that often gets confused with copyright. Trademark is actually 3 things. It's specific to a country, it's got a ticking clock, and it's specific to a product category. So, if I have that, if we go back to that fireman 18th century show that I just created, if I want to trademark that, I have to first decide, what am I trademarking? So if I say, oh, I think this would make a great, fireman's badge. I'm going to do an original fireman's badge for my show. So what I would do is go, well, where am I going to make this thing? So the first thing I'll say, I think people will buy this in America. Okay, so I'll request a trademark for the category of badges for America, right? The moment I do it, there's I think it's a 3-year, don't quote me on that, but it's 2 or 3 years. There's a period of time where I have to actually execute that trademark. I have to actually make that badge in America. And if I don't, it disappears and I got to reapply, right? But what I have for 3 years is if like, let's say someone over in a different state's like, hey, did you hear about this cool fireman show that came out? Let's make badges. I can say, aha, I have the trademark on that product category in America for 3 years. I can cease and desist that person. I can sue that person, right? But if I don't use that trademark, it goes away. So trademarking is very expensive. It's category based, and it's a much later concern, I think, for most creators. But again, just giving you the basic one-on-one of that to be aware. So okay, that is really basically my presentation. As you go out there and kind of cook your own IP, do it your own way, I really, first of all, want to remind people, look at it as an intellectual property. Then think about really the types of experts and partners that would kind of guide you to where it naturally wants to go. Might not be animated series. Remember the format of cartoons and the audiences are very specific, very categorized. Remember there are two ways to go: the long solo and bend the knee to a big company. And really what you're doing is creating a business, and you want that business to extend and expand. And remember, businesses have to be trademarked if you want to succeed in specific categories. So that's it.
All right.
I hope you're proud of that.
Eric, thank you so much for showing us your presentation on pitching and what that entails. I had a few questions for you. First, how would you describe the experience of the very first series pitch that you were involved in?
Well, that's quite a while ago. So it was back in 1995. My first TV series pitch that I did my own was for a compilation show. It was called Cartoon Sushi. So I had this idea of using student animated films and short films in the festival circuit to kind of create kind of like a half hour of like shorts, right? And to do that, I had to come up with like a packaging element. How could I put this into a show? So I bought the promotional rights for an anime called Ninja Scroll, Jubei Ninpacho. So I had, through Manga Entertainment, the rights to air 30-second clips and under to basically like promote their movie, but also I could do whatever I want with it. So I had this really stupid idea that I would play it in original Japanese, but I'd create original subtitles that had nothing to do with the Japanese. It's like really terrible idea by today's cultural standards. So I created these subtitles and I printed them on a piece of paper, right? And then I cut them all out and I taped them on one side. So I went in my boss's office and I said, hey, look at this crazy idea. And I pressed play on a VHS tape. I had subtitles taped to the TV and I was tearing them off, at the right moment, right? And, these ninjas were like, you'll die. Not until I watch this next cartoon. Okay, I'll watch it with you. And then it would cut to the first cartoon. And then you come back and they're like, that was really funny. What's coming up next? Oh, there's a big surprise. And so it was really, really, really stupid and silly. But they bought it in the room. And they gave me a budget to go out and license student films and finished animated works. And, the first season did well. And then basically became like a pilot machine. So we were able to test original ideas inside of Cartoon Sushi to try to get new shows out there. And we were able to get Celebrity Deathmatch and I think Daria out of that.
What's really wild too is that is a format that has been very widely adopted too in the industry.
Yeah, the compilation show, the kind of pilot program. Yeah. I wasn't the first, but it was early.
So has the process of pitching projects to studios changed at all since the 1990s? You mentioned a little bit that audiences are more sophisticated in certain ways, but is there anything about the process that's changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, I always hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I want people to have a realistic idea of what's out there. I think pitching in general has become much more of an exclusive country club. So I do fear that the days of an unknown creator with a dream in their pocket, going into a major company and getting it picked up is just like, you just can't really bet on that anymore. I think what usually happens are the shows that are getting picked up are from the people who have been working on the inside for many, many years, have built up all the experience and the trust and the connections that when you're presenting that little 20-page show Bible, that's not the big thing that they're interested in. They're interested in you as a creator who's got 15 years working at their company, or 5 years at their company and 5 years somewhere else, and comes in very highly recommended, whose prior body of work is really respectable. And now we're seeing what you're going to do next. That's the real work. And I feel a little sad. I think in the 90s and early aughts, it was still the Wild West. So, one short film, an awesome pitch, you could kind of get in the room and sell the show. Now I think it's a lot more difficult. So you got to fill your team somewhere with at least a decade of experience spread across some different, packaged elements of your show, whether it's a director, a writer, a franchise, actor, not so much. But I think, that bar is so high right now. That's what's really changed for me.
So let's say that you have the level of experience you needed. Who do creators pitch projects to, and how do they get in the room to pitch the project?
Well, I mean, the traditional structure is really try to get representation. I think if you don't have a lot of connections in the industry and you don't mix in that world all the time, a better chance you have is to go to an agency that can represent your work and represent you, because they're the ones who are going to set you up with the 20, 30 meetings, and they're going to help package you, they're going to help introduce you, and they're going to tell you what places not to pitch, because they hopefully know what the current marketplace conditions are. And I'm not saying that you should pitch to a marketplace condition, because if you do, you're already like 2 years too late. But it's good to know, if you went through representation, hey, right now is a really bad time to pitch a space epic. There's too many out there, for example.
So we've talked a little bit about like what you should think about before pitching a series, but what materials do you actually need to develop a series pitch? I know this is sort of the thing that creators love to do. This is the fun part.
Yeah.
What do you need for the fun part, though?
Well, that's the $1 million question. I think it really does depend on the genre, so it's hard to answer in the abstract. But first of all, you really have to prove that you're an expert of this particular form that you're pitching. So to take a slice of an example, if I'm pitching a 4-to-7 bridge social emotional show, I really first have to understand the cognitive abilities of a 4 to 7 year old. How much can they handle? What kind of stories matter to them? What do they consider safe? What do their parents consider safe? What are they also watching and into? What can you compare against? And how do they view the world? What does their kind of like 3-foot view of the world look like, right? And after that, I mean, what is the format that you think that 4 to 7 year old can handle? And then go back to the classics. Am I a police occupational, family or flyer, and then place I haven't been before, main character in their thing, supporting cast, and then, hey, I've been drawing this little character for a long time. I've got 100 pages of sketches on him. It's like really a character I've worked out. Here's a bunch of like cartoons I've already done with them, like 4 panels, and look how funny it is. And hey, I tried to self-publish it over here, and it looks like 100 people like it already. Again, that's all building up to the Bible presentation. So instead of doing Bible and then thinking it out, think about the depth and then present it in the Bible. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense also with the idea of what kids can handle at certain age groups. I mean, I personally think it would be great to have more series that can really like scare children, because I think horror for a young age group would be just delightful. What are some of the most common misconceptions you've encountered about pitching throughout your career?
Let's see. I think probably the common misconception, the most common, is that they'll just love this idea and then they're going to hire people who are more experienced than me to help me make it. That's a very common one. And that's really tough. I mean, as a consultant, a lot of times I got to give people really bad news, which is, outside of the industry, maybe invest in this, wrote this up, and are kind of waiting for someone to just drop these millions of dollars on them. And then, like some animation team will take care of it, right? Or like you'll get someone to like write it, right? Or I'd love to be in the room. I'd love to be helpful. I promise I'll work with those people. Like there's kind of no reason for them to buy that concept from you, because as a lot of development executives will tell you, like ideas are a dime a dozen, right? It's execution and expertise and format that really make people feel appropriate that something will work.
So let's say you give a pitch
Mm.
and you catch the car. What are the range of possible outcomes after a pitch, and how could your next what could your next steps be?
Sure, sure. So a very common positive next step you're going to get is some kind of development deal. A development deal will usually be a buyer or distributor's way of just investing a little bit more effort to reassure themselves that this is the thing they're going to drop the millions on. So that, could be 50 to 150 to $200,000 worth of content that they're going to spend with you. Could be a couple of scripts. It could be an animatic. It could be an actual fully animated pilot. It could be an extension or rewrite of the Bible based on what they liked, but what they really want fixed before you go forward. So a development deal is a strong possibility. In the more rare case, and this is probably more relevant to production companies and individuals, is they might say, hey, we like this. If you were to raise the rest of the financing or get it kind of most of the way to the finish line, will come on as a co-production or an acquisition when you're done. So please come back, and we're feeling pretty good about this. You might be lucky enough to get some kind of letter of intent. You might be able to get lucky enough to even get kind of deep into the financial discussion, but then it's really going to be about them coming on as a partnership with you, and then figure out together how you're going to raise all the money and who gets what's rights and what part distributes where in order to do a true co-production.
We got a great question in the webinar chat, which is, does the length of a show matter? Traditionally, there were like 11-minute, 22-minute formats, and a certain number of episodes. And has streaming disrupted those strict breakdowns?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the days of the Simpsons runs are really gone. 15, 20 seasons. I think something about the appetite in streamers or the way that consumer products companies are working with broadcasters, like there's very few chances for a super long running series, with the big exception being Japanese anime. Because that's its own unique beast. That's a whole separate conversation. That format has changed. But in terms of like what I'm seeing right now, I think there's still vibrant activity in the sub 4 minutes, which is like the AVOD world, kind of like your YouTubes. I still see 7 and 11-minute formats pretty active for 4 to 7 the whole way to 6 to 11. I see 11s and 22s for 6 to 11, 9 to 14, and I still see half hour being pretty vibrant for adult, as well as feature and streamer feature, and kind of like streamer. And so I think it's not so much that it's shorter, it's just like the menu's getting a little more expensive.
Eric, of the projects that you were involved with that you can discuss, which one was your favorite to pitch?
To pitch. To pitch. Well, I really, it's funny, some of the shows that I pitched were kind of super easy in a way. Like, so whenever I discovered and developed a series called Afro Samurai back in 2003 to about 2009. That's when I was really EPing on it. We took a big risk at Studio Gonzo. It was a crazy project. It was just like a toy with a backstory written. I optioned the rights. I worked with the creator to come up with like some basic storylines, but we basically hired this really stylish director to do a 60 to 90-second visual test, right? And so we just kind of knocked people's socks off with this crazy just action fight scene thing. And I wasn't even allowed in the animation studio for it. Like the director was very strict. He was like, I won't talk to you. I'll do it my way. If you like my work, you get my work. Maybe you can come to the audio mix just as a courtesy. And I went to the audio mix and I saw the pilot for Afro Samurai, and I was just like, I had tears. I couldn't believe it. So I sent it. I made a bunch of copies on my MacBook Pro like it was like a mixtape, you know, and I hand printed labels and I carried it in a backpack in LA for like a year. I was just like handing out to everyone I know. And I was catching up with a friend of mine who was at the time president of Spike TV, and I mailed a DVD to his house, and he just called me back. He's like, Eric, I got this crazy Afro thing. I'm gonna buy this. I was like, what? So just kind of happened, you know. Um, so that I think that was one of my favorite pitches. But in actual like presentation, when I presented the I think it was actually Transformers Combiner Wars, which is a series I was the showrunner for. And then Titans Return, which is the second cycle. I really presented to the buyer, and they were so into it that within the first 3 minutes, they were pitching it back to me, and I was like, "And then, okay, yes, it'll do that too. Yes, you're right. It is absolutely based on classic Arthurian myths. Yes, I agree. It is epic in scale. And oh, wonderful! It's like a Godzilla movie with robots." And she was just giving me all these like lines, and I was like, "You're pitched better than me, so thank you."
All right. There's one more question I just wanted to ask you. I know that you've been a huge proponent of anime. What do you think that anime as it's not even really a genre, more of a collection of techniques and styles. But what do you feel that format or the collection of formats gets right?
Oh, that's a really complicated question. I like to think about anime like hip hop, which is it's now so seeped into the culture of so many creators around the world that it's almost impossible to take it out of a lot of work. It's really like seeped in. I've been trying to use this term a lot, which I call cowboy anime. You know, and I say cowboy anime is any Japanese anime influenced work where the creative center is not Japan. It's kind of just like my
Like
scientific
Powerhouse
socialized.
Animation or Legend of Korra.
That's great. I mean, all these people are very heavily influenced by it, but it's not kind of capital A anime in a sense, because that I always think of when the creative center is in Japan, regardless of what it actually looks like or how it's designed, or it somehow to me is anime, you know? And so, that, but I think it's really personal. What I love about anime, especially when it comes to properties for kids, like I would say like as young as like 6, it's unafraid to be incredibly emotional, and it's very personal at the same time as being epic. You know what I mean? I think that's the one thing I would love to see more out of American animation, especially serial episodic television, is, Naruto could just cry, and Goku could just be so sad. And then all these like wild, uncontrollable emotions, I think somehow American producers and writers are a little bit afraid of. They kind of jump through them really quickly, but then they get back to like action and moving around. Whereas like anime, they can like sit in these really long emotional moments, and I feel like that makes kids happy. That makes kids feel like I can relate to that. And I think that like that emotional exposure is what I get so excited about watching, you know romantic comedies, sports dramas, sci-fi action, all the stuff that anime does so well.
All right, we are nearly out of time. Where can our viewers go to find more of your work and your videos on surviving animation?
Well, pretty easy. Surviving animation on YouTube is where a lot of my videos exist. I also kind of keep an active conversation on LinkedIn. I like to talk about current trends. I always bring up whether something moving and shaking in the world of licensing, or in the world of production, or if there's a new deal out there or a new adaptation. Anything kind of piques my interest. So I do love LinkedIn as a platform. I'm that weird guy. So, but I think it's a great place to kind of talk about the business of cartoons.
All right, Eric, thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for joining us for day one of the Animation Trends event powered by Toon Boom Animation. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us for day two. Topics will include a 2D rigging art stream, a panel on rigging misconceptions, a conversation with the team at Lighthouse Studios on the production behind the Cuphead show, and a discussion with Nickelodeon and Sizzler High School about their mentorship program. You won't want to miss it, so be sure to tune in.
Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, and sorry for the tech problems.